Recently, all of us read this book, The Making of Biblical Womanhood, How the Subjugation of Women Became Gospel Truth by Beth Allison Barr. And today, we're going to rant about the patriarchy. Today, we have a guest with us, our second guest on our Drink and Rant, and that is my friend, Tennille.
Hello.
Tennille and I were college roommates and have known each other for about 5 years, and Bonnie and Tennille have met briefly, but we have all been interested in very similar things and kind of our faith journeys, and so today we wanted to have her on so that we could talk about the subject. As mentioned, this is a drink and rant, so we have to introduce our beverages of choice. Tonight I'm drinking, this is not sponsored, Trader Joe's hard pressed cider rosé. I don't know why it's a rosé as well as a cider. There you go.
I have a blackberry White Claw, which I have to admit, White Claws are rather anemic, but it's what I have, so it's a White Claw.
I have this lovely glass of wine, and it's very choice. That's all I know about it, so.
Perfect.
Excellent. Okay. So as mentioned, we are going to talk about the patriarchy. So we wanted to start off with just kind of like a what is it? If you have any thoughts of like what comes to mind when you think of the patriarchy, I think one thing that we want to be careful with as well is not tearing anybody down with our definition of it or even in our conversation of it, just because the patriarchy and the idea of that, like so much of why it is the way that it is just because that's how it's been done. And so people may not have thought about like why it is the way that it is. And so it's something we want to address, but we want to address respectfully. So any thoughts on definitions of the patriarchy and thoughts regarding that?
For context, I did have like screenshots of, I Googled the definition of patriarchy just to see what the generic definition was. And they kind of gave 3 definitions, but the gist of it was not specifically relating to biblical patriarchy, but that just male leadership and dominance generally in culture. And it did mention, I think it also mentioned biology in one of the definitions, interestingly. But I was also curious about the difference between patriarchy and sexism. And so I looked up that definition as well. And honestly, I don't remember what it said, but I think I was kind of confused. I mean, like, I can see that there is a difference between the two, patriarchy and sexism, but trying, in my mind, they were very closely related, what the definitions were. Maybe patriarchy is kind of a noun and sexism is a verb, or not, it is a noun, but kind of more like an act than, it's more active than patriarchy, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe like sexism being often the fruit of patriarchy.
Yeah, something like that, maybe.
Yeah. That could be. Yeah, I think when I think about patriarchy, I just think about like, I guess like male power and control. And usually, again, maybe not necessarily in its own way, but like the fruit of that ending up being that women are put down and not able to have a place at the table, honestly. And that kind of becoming a cycle that ends up hurting half of the population.
Mm-hmm.
In this book, Beth Allison Barr gives a historian's definition of what the patriarchy usually means in its main meanings in English. So the first one is male ecclesiastical leaders such as the Patriarch, aka the Archbishop of Constantinople in Greek Orthodoxy. The second one being legal power of male household heads, fathers and husbands. And thirdly, a society that promotes male authority and female submission. And so that is the definition that she took and used for mostly what she was focusing on. And I think that that fits with mostly what we're talking about as well, that it's that idea that there's this male authority and female submission. I think that it is safe for us to all say that we all grew up in that system. So, in your experience with Christian culture, what are some ways that you have seen women expected to submit to men, either their husbands and or other people, pastors, leaders, just men in general?
I know some things that the first things that come to mind is the house church that my family went to for a while, which I, loved all the people there and enjoyed a lot of my experiences there and everything. But this was still examples of that. For example, like during when we were reading the Bible, only the men could teach or preach or whatever it was that they were doing. And I feel like I have vague memories of only the men being able to pray in the group setting amongst like when the whole group was all together. Like if women were just together, then whatever. I couldn't be misremembering that, but I have been in situations also like that where women weren't allowed to pray out loud either in mixed company.
Mixed company.
So there's definitely that for sure. And then just kind of a very like a strong emphasis on women serving the men. So like food and just very deferent, I think that's the right word, attitudes, which I think there's aspects of if there is mutual respect and mutual deference, but like not to the point of, I do this because he is the man kind of thing.
Yeah, I think for me, kind of the same thing of like specific roles, especially in the church that I guess I would say that I spent like formative years in, of specific roles being for men and for women, women not being able to teach Sunday school after a certain age, like they could only teach girls or women after whatever that certain age was, and even just like kids being split up at an early age because of that ideal in like the church service, women not being able to preach, not being able to read the scriptures for Bible reading sections, like they could serve on the worship team, but that was like kind of the only thing like on stage that they were allowed to do. Definitely being like expected to serve in like nursery, food things, coffee things, things that are like behind the scene things, and not up front and in the open. Maybe not that those things don't, but things that are not necessarily seen as having a huge need for skill and qualification, and even like not being able to serve communion. I remember that as a specific thing that just didn't make sense to me.
I grew up in the same church as the one Jeanette's talking about, from the time I was about 4 until 22. And then but I distinctly remember the next church I went to after I moved. So I was 22, 23. And they had a woman on stage leading music and praying. And I just remember the first few weeks being like, is this okay? And just like feeling like so conflicted inside and almost feeling like, am I feeling conviction? Like, do we need to leave? And just like really wrestling with that because it was so foreign. And I'd been taught that that was wrong. So it was an eye opener.
I was gonna say, Jeanette, what your point about communion was a really interesting one, because it's just so ironic that we can serve, coffee and donuts, but can't serve crackers and grape juice.
Yep.
That and women not being able to baptize people. Like, why can we not also welcome people into the body of Christ?
Yeah. Despite the fact, as I feel like it's often pointed out in like Mother's Day sermons, for example, when they decide to talk about women of the Bible, that women play actually such a prominent role in the Bible, and like Mary Magdalene being one of the first people to tell people that Jesus had risen and that kind of thing. Like, I don't know, it's so strange to me that this is the direction that we've gone with all of this, because it just doesn't make sense that or there's parts of the Bible that mention these prominent women, like these are prominent women who were influential in their community and society. Well, how do you think they were prominent and influential? Like, they obviously were doing stuff. Like,
yeah.
Another big way that this shows up, especially in church cultures, is how women are expected, predominantly, not in all churches, but in a lot of circles, that women are going to be stay-at-home wives and mothers, and even more in a lot of circles to homeschool their kids. So there's like the set role, like that women are allowed to do this one career, being a stay-at-home wife and mother, but men they can choose whatever they want, whether it's a quote secular job or job in the ministry.
Yeah, and along with that, the wife and mother role, I mean, wife kind of encompasses this if you're aware of this, but supporting the husband in his role is your job in ministry.
Yeah, that should be like your greatest delight as a wife, is to help your husband excel and make his vocation, secure and all of those things.
And that even comes into like how women often introduce themselves. Like, men usually say, oh, this is what I do for work and whatever, and maybe even like, these are my ministries in church. And women often are, oh, I'm this person's wife.
And just interesting to note, how often, hint, not very often, is there any follow-up question? Oh, what do you do, to the woman? At least in my experience.
That goes into completely other topics of like identity and that kind of thing. And so then I'm like, well, I don't identify as my job, so I'm not going to be like, hey, I'm Tennille, I'm a shipping clerk. Yeah,
that's a good point.
So yeah, I mean, like I said, that's a whole other tangent, but
yeah, but it definitely, like, even like asking like women or wives and mothers specifically, like, oh, what are your hobbies, or what do you do for fun, or like, what are your interests? Like, that's not something that even generally gets asked, because it's assumed that your interests and your hobbies are your kids and taking care of your family.
Another huge aspect that is affected by patriarchy is relationships and dating / courtship / whatever that I think we've all been affected by. It's the man's role to lead, and so therefore he has to make the first move in a relationship, which what do you define as the first move? And so then in a lot of cases, like in my case, even I think in some ways, I mean, I don't know that I had that many opportunities anyway, but even if I had an opportunity where I would have seen somebody that I liked, I would have wrestled with, well, how can I make that known? Because that would be making the first move and that would be leading the relationship. So, and that wouldn't be okay.
Even like beyond that, like if you get into a relationship too, even like the steps beyond that of like proposing and or even like planning like dates or paying for things or any of those things, like it's expected that the man does those things.
Mm-hmm.
And like obviously it's nice to feel cared for and to have someone plan those things and lead those things, but how much of that is societal expectation versus maybe what people's strengths are. If your strengths are planning and making things happen, like does that have to be seen as a like even like a domineering type thing? Because I think that's the thing, is like when women who are strong leaders are put into situations where they excel, women are seen as too powerful, too strong, and like
aggressive,
and like that's not your place, that's not what you're supposed to do. And that's like even into secular culture, like that's not just a church thing. But then you see women in the Bible who are strong leaders and
driving freaking
aggressors,
tent pegs into people's heads,
are heroin jail. And Deborah and so many of the New Testament women that are oftentimes pushed to the side, even though they were the leaders, they were the teachers, they were the preachers, they were respected and they were honored in those positions, and they were not seen as too powerful, too domineering, too aggressive. And they're mentioned in the Bible for a reason, because they need to be there to show that they have a place, and that women have a place in the church and in the world.
I think that's the worst part, or the biggest trap in biblical patriarchy, is that within that framework, within that system, it is a self-defeating cycle, because if women are to always submit, it's a lose-lose, because if you try to bring anything up, or even if you say, my conviction is this, or I believe the Bible is saying this, you can't. You're wrong, because you're the one. If the man in your life is saying, no, this is the way it is, you have to submit.
But you have no voice.
You have no voice. Women's voices are automatically discounted and worth less. And the fact that in the Bible, and we're all growing up and we're going to Sunday school, and who's your favorite Bible character? Nobody bats an eye. All of these girls like Paul, or all these people. How often did you ever hear a little boy, or a little girl for that matter, or an adult man, name a female character? Like, it doesn't happen. And sure, there's fewer women, but like just biblical women are not held up as examples for everyone. They're held up as examples for women.